Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy so that when people confront you with crazy things about things that may have happened 400 years before you were even born, you might have a little better grasp of an answer. I say that as a predicate to our first guest, but remind you that you can also find podcasts of all of our previous episodes up on our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and then search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Freedom and prosperity are concepts, but sometimes there are bits of mortar and brick underneath those concepts, and that is history. True conservatism understands that we all stand on the shoulders of those who went before us, good, bad, and indifferent, and that we need to understand that. So it's very special for us, considering we were live from Jamestown for the 400th anniversary of representative government in the New World, to welcome in Jarrett Stepman. He's a contributor for the Daily Signal. He co-hosts the Right Side of History podcast, and he's got a book coming out, The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. Jarrett, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you, sir?
Oh, thank you very much. I'm doing great.
If the Virginia Democratic Party disassociated itself from Thomas Jefferson, if they can do that, and the city of Charlottesville he grew up in can distance himself from Thomas Jefferson, what hope does the rest of the country have?
Really not much, and I have actually lived for a little while in Charlottesville, and anybody who's been there or traveled there understands the history is virtually covered in pains to Thomas Jefferson, one of the greatest men of the American Republic, and I'd say one of the most influential men of the last millennium, I mean, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And, of course, his home is there in Charlottesville, and is the author of, I think, what many see as one of the greatest freedom documents ever crafted by the hands of man. I think that's just something that Americans, certainly throughout our history, have understood. I mean, Jefferson in his own day had their political partisans who were against him, but through American history, the words of Thomas Jefferson have been an inspiration to generations, and for all kinds of, I think, very good causes in our history. If Thomas Jefferson is on the chopping block in this country, you start to wonder, what are the kind of things that we can actually agree on as a society? I mean, can we agree on the Declaration of Independence? Can we agree on the handful of great founders of this country, ones who were an inspiration to many, many generations of Americans and people all over the world? And I think that's a disturbing thing. I think, certainly what I talk about in my book on the War on History is there is an assault on these concepts, and I think it leads to a very bad place when we as a society can't tolerate individuals like Thomas Jefferson and increasingly people like George Washington, and you move on from there, and it's a very ugly thing.
Well, how is it we're being asked to accept our own failings and our own flaws? And, he's just, Bill Clinton has just, powerful men have powerful appetites. And, it's just a common thing, and he's a child of his generation. But yet we don't cut the founding fathers the same slack.
We don't cut them any slack, and in fact, we see some of their failings, which I very much see as human failings, to be what absolutely defines them. I mean, instead of defining Thomas Jefferson by the things that he put on his gravestone, the author of the Declaration of Independence, an author of a bill on religious liberty, the man who founded, it was a part of the founder of the University of Virginia and bringing education to Americans. I mean, these are timeless things. I mean, these are things that have affected millions and really at this point billions and billions of people. I mean, especially as you go through time. And so, these are the most essential. This is the exceptional part of what they were about. I think I think there's a tendency in modern America, especially, to look at the things that are unexceptional about human beings. I mean, we are flawed people. Humanity is fallen. I mean, you look at history, and there's a whole lot of ugliness there. I think that Americans have been right to celebrate what's been great about this country, and understanding that human beings are flawed, that they do make mistakes, that some individuals are, they're not perfect, and I think that's fine. I mean, but what they did, what the founding generation did, and certainly generations thereafter, was create a truly great country, a beacon of liberty, and a beacon for, frankly, people all over the world who have come here and made a home here and made something far better than what has existed throughout the world through most of history. This very short experiment, and just over 200 years, the incredible things that America, which started out as a small set of colonies at the edge of civilization, has become this great republic, and I think one that has brought liberty and prosperity to untold numbers of people. That's something to celebrate and to try to understand the people who were responsible for creating it.
I brought this up to an activist. We're visiting with Jarrett Stepman, who has got a book coming out, The War on History. And it is unfortunately one of those things that is going to define this period of time, perhaps even more so than these riots between Antifa and a bunch of white nationalists who insist on trying to convince people that they're conservatives when they're not. I have to say that each time, otherwise I just don't feel like I've done my due diligence on those people. But as we go forward into this, I was telling somebody about Jefferson. I said, you realize that when Jefferson died, and shortly thereafter, it was painfully clear that he was in worse financial straits than many of the people who had worked for him and had bought their way out of slavery. This idea that there's this gentry that is just passed down their little slice of liberty from generation to generation. When I was born in 1963, the 50 richest Americans are nowhere on the list anymore. The Gates family certainly wasn't on the list. The Walton family wasn't on the list then. We churn wealth. We churn opportunity. And one of the great things about this country, and that's truly what I'm afraid of that we lose if we erase all of our history, is this ability to churn opportunity and wealth from generation to generation, Jarrett.
I think one of the truly great things about America is this incredibly large and prosperous middle class in this country. I mean, frankly, where are the Jeffersons in government? I mean, there aren't many. I mean, George Washington had no biological children. I mean, frankly, there is such a turnover. And to me, as an American, I think most Americans, the founding fathers are the founding fathers not because they happen to be our biological relatives or anything like this, but because they created a great country. They had these great ideas. They created an independent nation that brought liberty and prosperity to millions of people, many of whom today live in America, had no direct connection to that country as it was founded, but it became their country over time. And I think that is a beautiful thing. And I think that that's what makes America both a strong, a prosperous, and a very good country. I mean, it really is one where generations of Americans have been able to build their lives in this country. I mean, I think every family knows, you're looking back and knows the hardships of those who came before us, the struggle that happened in other countries and other places around the world. I mean, other places where certainly people of certain groups could never get ahead in life. I mean, there was just no chance. Your family could have been around for 1,000 years in one place, and no matter how talented you are, how many abilities you have, you can never progress anywhere. You'll never be above the level of a serf or something along these lines. In America, that idea was very different. And I think it not only transformed the United States, I really think it has transformed the world. And the United States in a very short time has gone from a very small country with big ideas to a very big country with big ideas. And that should be something that we are willing to, at the end of the day, while we're not going to say that America is certainly not a perfect country, it is a great one. It's committed to great things, and we shouldn't be afraid to defend those things.
Jarrett Stepman, the author of the new book, The War on History, writes for the Daily Signal, hosts a history podcast as well, The Right Side of History. For them, I appreciate your time this weekend with us. And we mentioned that we had done this show from Jamestown at the anniversary of the first General Assembly meeting I made the comment at the time that maybe now we know what the bell curve looks like, because they threw off collectivism 400 years ago because they were starving to death, and they created a more market-based economy, and then they established a General Assembly. Now here we are 400 years later saying, gee, if we could do socialism right, we could do collectivism right. Is this one of the flaws in not learning from history or trying to erase history, is that we're doomed, even if it takes 400 years, to repeat what we did ourselves 400 years ago and Venezuela is doing today?
Absolutely. I think that is a big issue, and I think it's unfortunate, especially the younger generations, millennials and even younger, don't have a lot of experience. They don't know much about, for instance, even the Cold War and what that was about. They don't understand, how communism and socialism have ruined the lives of millions of people. I think, unfortunately, because many young people don't have that kind of historical knowledge, or they don't have any direct connection or experience living under a socialist and communist regime. I mean, my in-laws grew up in communist Poland, and they have a deep dislike and hatred of what communism really means, because they experienced it, and they offer so many, I think, false hopes. This idea that, well, everything's going to be taken care of, that you're going to get free things, and I think this is very appealing to people, but it leads to inhuman misery. And I think studying even just a little bit of history, people understand that. But I think, especially for those who are, I think, today trying to undo American history, to say that it's rooted only in bad things, that it's oppressive, it's tyrannical. And I think a lot of these people do have an agenda. They want to replace an old-fashioned American ethos, which frankly is just, it's an attachment to freedom. And I think that's what leads to things like what we call capitalism or the free markets. It's just this belief in this idea of freedom, that you shouldn't be controlled by some all-powerful, disconnected central authority. I think these are vital concepts to what America is and why it's become so prosperous. Sometimes we need a reawakening of that, and we need to be reminded of these great things that we stand for. And I think that's what's so important about preserving history, about teaching about the Americans of the past, teaching our conflicts, and how America stood against things like fascism and communism. I mean, these are important things to instruct through the generations. We should know this as a society, but unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge is going away, or it's being twisted to serve the ends of people who are radicals and revisionists, who want to twist American history to fit their very radical agenda.
Jarrett, I want to ask you this, because this story was really just breaking this week. The New York Times has announced that in conjunction with the other 400th anniversary from the Portuguese slave trader ship that ran aground or came ashore in Jamestown, said, "Hey, we've got no money. Can you take some? Would you take some of our slaves in exchange for the supplies we need to make it the rest of the way to the Bahamas?" And, of many compromises Americans have made, and I'll call them Americans, the Jamestown governors, maybe this is the essential one. They should have said, nah, you know what, just take them. We're good here. But they took the slaves, and the New York Times, in commemoration of that anniversary, has announced their 1619 project to claim that all American history starts in 1619 and is therefore started from this bad big bang of slavery, and that all things America has created or stood for is tainted because it was made on the back of enslaved people. It is chilling to think that the New York Times is going to do that. The only thing I can hold out hope for is the New York Times, like so many other newspapers, have waned in popularity, so maybe they're the tree falling in the woods with very few people to hear it. But when you hear of a news organization saying that they're going to put their weight and heft and authority behind this idea of erasing everything America has stood for, do they realize that's going to mean them too?
Well, I think they are really egging this on. It's very clear. I mean, look, the history of slavery is very important to understanding America and the history of the world, frankly. And I think it was very telling. I mean, even at the beginning of this project, they said that it, and this is a direct quote, it aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding. And I found that those words to be incredibly insightful into what this project is about. I mean, I think it really is. It is the debate of our time. Is America's true founding 1619, where everything is attached to slavery and race, and that is what ultimately defines America? Or is our true founding 1776, the ideas of freedom and liberty, the Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence? And I think that it is a central battle this time. It's something that I think at one point all Americans could agree on, 1776 being as the origin of what America is today. But this is a really important battle, and I think that the New York Times, I think, unfortunately, has decided to go, I think, with this kind of ideological track. I don't think this is just simply about getting history right. I think it's intentionally being used to, certainly inflame, I think, racial division and things like this. And frankly, it's an odd argument to make. It's basically you're saying that, America is grounded in slavery, and everything that came after that is because of it. And to me, that's a bizarre argument. This is kind of some of the battles we had, back in 1860. I mean, going back to the Civil War and things like that, and why the New York Times would try to open up this rift is really beyond me, but it doesn't surprise me. And I think this project is very ambitious. They're trying to push this not just to their readers, but also to schools, and they're going to try to influence curriculum around the country. So this is unfortunately not just tied to the shrinking readership of the New York Times, but could be something that goes well beyond this into presidential politics, into local politics, into local schools. So, people can't just ignore it because it's happening in the New York Times. This is a very big story.
Well, and we have it here in Central Virginia, $300,000 grant to a local school division to teach the failings of America. Do you know where that $300,000 came from, Jarrett?
I don't.
The Montpelier Foundation, the home of the author of the Constitution itself, is now paying a school to teach their students the failings of America. And I worry that there is no pulling out of this tailspin when that kind of thing is happening.
Yeah, I think that's why this battle has to be fought. I mean, certainly why I called my book The War on History, and I think that it really is up to Americans. I mean, those who care about their country, care about their future, care about their kids, to fight back on this and don't back down. Don't just simply accept this idea that this narrative that America is just this awful, terrible country. I mean, certainly in teaching history, we don't just try to make it revisionist. We try to teach the full breadth of history. But if you don't understand from the beginning of what the country stands for, if you don't understand what 1776 is about, if you don't understand the words of Thomas Jefferson, and all you're getting is this negative portrayal of America as an oppressive place, you're getting a warped image. And I think for those who are political manipulators, I think that they that's what they want. And they want to take down this idea of America because it stands in the path of what they see as progress, they see as their political aims. And I think for Americans of common sense who understand our history and want to preserve it and want to preserve the good things about this country so that we can move on from the bad things and preserve the good things and make sure that future generations have them, you have to step up. You have to speak out. You can't just let your local school turn this kind of radical curriculum. You have to fight back, whether it be on the big scale or be on the small scale, because these battles really matter. These things are really this really is up at stake right now, and I think that this is the central battle of our time. And America's greatness in the future will be very much determined by whether or not we win or lose.
Where do you think it's leading, Jarrett? Because I worry that, as much as we point to Venezuela and their failed attempts at socialism, and there are some similarities, I look at places like Zimbabwe and South Africa where it's been reparational, and unfortunately now it's bloodshed in Zimbabwe because Robert Mugabe, gave the land instead of, quote, to the people, to his friends, and they collapsed the economy in a decade, and now it's a bloodbath over who's in charge, and I worry that I don't think the people who are saying, well, I'm poor right now, what do I care about history? I'm poor right now, and these folks tell me if we can get rid of this, I can be better off right now. If they realize the bloodshed that's going to have to come in order to win back what you think you are being deprived of now.
Yeah, I think what they're creating is a situation that's potentially highly explosive. I mean, the ugly incident that did take place in Charlottesville, where you have Antifa and white supremacists battling it out on the streets, I think that only is going to become more common, frankly, and especially as we become more dysfunctional, and frankly, identity is that you're boiled down simply to your identity, your kind of collective identity, rather than your merit as individuals or your identity as an American. And I think that's what we're heading to. And a nation like the United States, which is multi-ethnic, which is has many religions, has many people, a very diverse country, I think that's a toxic, poisonous idea that's going to lead to whether it be a high-scale conflict like violence on the streets, or more low-scale ones where you simply you can't get along with your neighbors. You have a high-level societal distrust. You have these kind of tensions that boil over, and I think that's why this is so dangerous. I think this is why the issue of identity politics is really a cancer on the republic. I think there are some who want to manipulate it for their ends. They want to bring in, what they see as our socialist utopia or whatever it is, but they're really playing with fire, and I think they're going to cause a lot of terrible things in this country. I think we should, part of the reason why we preserve history and statues, we want to learn from the past. We want to learn from things like the Civil War. We don't want to repeat those mistakes, and I think that this idea that we're just going to simply tear down the history and tear down things that make us uncomfortable and basically say that your entire identity is based on your race or something like this, these are toxic, cancerous things, and that's in addition to simply defending American principles. These are the things that need to be defended, or we're going to get in a situation in this country where we can't get along with each other. We can't even have a civil debate because we can't even agree to the terms of the debate. And I think that leads to a very ugly situation like we see in places like Venezuela, or we see in places like Zimbabwe, but instead it'll come to America. I think the most advanced nation, the country that has been such a beacon of prosperity and hope.
Jarrett, so last point, give us something to look forward to instead of looking backwards at the eraser of history. Are the young people realizing what's happening? Because our founder, John Taylor, was famous for taking his kids on conversations down the primrose path. Like, okay, let's role play this out. Okay, you want to do this. Well, if X, Y, and Z then happens, do kids realize that if we erase the Civil War, then where does Martin Luther King come from? If Martin Luther King is gone, where does the Civil Rights Movement go? If you start taking out parts of history, the rest of the present falls apart. Is the next generation grasping this?
I think there is a little bit of pushback, especially with the kind of pure identity politics of today that unfortunately plague our politics. I think this is idea that, look, isn't this the central theme of, we talk about Martin Luther King Jr., who, maybe is now one of the few kind of centralizing, everybody appreciates Martin Luther King, but this idea, of course, this very American idea that you're being judged as an individual, you be judged not based on your skin color, but your character, by who you are, and things like this. If that melts away in this country, I think, and there are a lot of young people, maybe who haven't been given a lot of knowledge about history, haven't necessarily been prepared by our education system, and who do kind of see that and see kind of the ugliness that could be involved with this, and I do think rebel against it. And I do hope that there is, and I do think that those who are trying to broach this kind of pure identity politics, I think there is going to be a blowback from regular Americans. This kind of politics that I think has become very common on college campuses across our country, I think a lot of Americans, just regular Americans, are finally getting a terrible dose of that, and I think there are people who reject it. And so I'm certainly not without hope. I think it's more of a warning message and a warning of where our culture is going and where our society is going and where our institutions are going. But I think it's up to common sense Americans to put their foot down. And I think that's quite possible. I think that American ideas and culture, I think they stand for themselves as great things. I think people do, deep down, they understand this. They understand deep in their hearts that what America stands for is something good and great, and they don't want to lose that. And I think that is where the rebound takes place. And I think this kind of war on history, I think it's overstepped itself. And I think there are going to be a lot of people, not just conservatives, but people kind of maybe even across the spectrum, who are going to start looking at this and saying, this is really dangerous. We need to put our foot down. We need to stop this to make sure that there is a United States of America in the future.
Well, the two groups spending more time getting rid of history on the planet right now are the Taliban and the U.S. right now. So it's not a good look for us, Jarrett. I appreciate it. I hope we have that pushback on it. We're going to continue to, and you have played a big role in that, giving folks really some good, actionable conversation. We keep doing what you're doing with the podcast and the book. When does the book come out?
So my book comes out on October 1st. Again, it's called The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past.
And you read his stuff at the Daily Signal, listen to his podcast there. Jarrett Stepman, thank you so much for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Up next, we visit with Brian Blase. He is the president of Blase Strategies, LLC. We're going to talk Medicaid expansion enrollment on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.